So hi, everybody. Good afternoon again. This is AJ Ehrenstein, Dean at Beyond Barnard, one of two for day 4 of Social Sciences Graduate School Week. Really excited again to see all of you, or at least your virtual black boxes with your names on them or profile pictures in this increasingly familiar Zoom space. I'm so delighted that we have three really fantastic alumni with us today, Lourdes, Divya, and Amber, who are going to talk about their experiences in graduate school after Barnard. Per usual, if you have questions, please feel free to send them to me privately in the chat. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with introductions and then some questions that I've sent to the panelists to think about beforehand, but I'll then play the role of the moderator. So if you want to send questions privately to me, that's a perfectly acceptable way to ask. If you'd like to go off mute and ask your question, also acceptable. Please remember that we are recording today's conversation and we'll make a call about how we share that afterwards. So if you don't want your voice recorded, you can of course share via the chat to me or to the entire group. But these panels go best when I say least. So I'm going to just go left to right and allow our panelists to introduce themselves. So on my screen, that goes Divya, Amber, and then Lourdes. So Divya, can I ask you to just kind of start off by telling us where you are? Hope you're doing well. And we'd love to hear a little bit about your current work and how you got to graduate school after Barnard.
Yeah, thanks so much, AJ, for setting this up. And thank you to all of you who I can't really see yet, but who will hopefully come in for being here. So I'm entering 6th year in the PhD program in history at Columbia. So, I didn't really go too far after Barnard, just crossed the street. And I work on British history and urban history. So specifically, I work on regeneration and gentrification in the post-war city. So my dissertation is a history of the townscape movement, which is a little-known planning movement that emerged in the 1940s in Britain. And I argue that this movement essentially shaped the way that we live in cities today. So I didn't go straight to graduate school from Barnard. I took a 2-year quote unquote break and I worked in finance in New York, so downtown for those 2 years. And I applied to graduate school during the fall of that 2nd year.
Great. What do you think of the movies of like it's like Shaun of the Dead, which is the, the Hot Fuzz, these movies that take place in like British towns, right? Like, is that part of what that movement is about? Like,
well, yes and no. I mean, those movies are, for one, great movies, very fun. Well, it's interesting because I think in Britain, there's a big belief that many British cities are actually what they call crap towns. So like really small towns people want to escape from. And the townscape movement is actually all about like big cities and how like this lively, vibrant urban lifestyle is something to be desired. So what I usually say is, I look at why people want to move to places like Brooklyn. So places that used to be kind of post-industrial, but are now seen as places where creative people want to live, which have a lot of character, which are walkable, which are kind of environmentally sensitive. So those types of urban spaces.
Super interesting. Excited to dig into it. All right, Amber, you are up.
Hi guys, I'm excited to be here, so thank you for inviting me. I'm Amber. I'm a 3rd-year PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania. I focus on political science. Right now, my research is looking at how do state policies concerning missing people vary across different spaces. I'm interested in whether the places with the highest rates of missing women, particularly Black and Indigenous women, how that and other historical phenomena impact trust and interactions in state institutions. So broadly, I focus on political behavior and public policy. I came to my PhD program right after Barnard, so I didn't take a break. And if you guys want, we can talk about the pros and cons to that later, but that's how I got here.
Awesome.
And hey, I'm Lourdes, and I am going to my 6th year at Northeastern University for my PhD in sociology. And I work with communities living around oil and gas facilities in Texas to monitor their air. So it is a bit sciencey, but it's sociology of science. So I study how through these processes of air monitoring that people really increase their collective efficacy, mobilization, and really become activists for themselves. And let me see. Oh, I majored in urban studies with a concentration in environmental science and did a lot of anthropology courses. And then I took a break, well, it was not a break, to become a New York City teaching fellow and teach science, high school science in Brooklyn. And then after that, I said, oh, I really want to continue my work around environmental justice and go into a social science environmental studies program.
So first of all, thank you. That's you have three such different projects. They all strike me as like distinctively Barnard in some way, whether they're thinking about urban spaces, whether they're thinking about identity in the social sciences, whether they're thinking about overlaps of STEM fields with social science. They all strike me as like differently recognizable as very Barnard kinds of projects. The first question I always like to ask in these kinds of panels is, how did you discern that graduate school was going to be a good fit for you? And what I appreciate about your comments in the opening here too is that you all took different paths. Amber, you came right out. It sounds like Divya and Lourdes, both of you took some time. So I'm curious, like, what were the processes that you went through to reflect on graduate school being a good fit for you? And anyone can take it away. We don't have to keep going. You know, just we could do popcorn.
I think for me, it clicked junior year at Barnard when I really was discovering my passion for the topics that I was studying in my classes. And it was more, you know, electives instead of trying to fulfill requirements that I was happy. I was happy doing reading and writing and researching, and I wanted to continue that. You know, by senior year, I was like, I don't want this to end. I want to stay in school. And then as a teacher, you know, I was teaching science, so it was more like I'm teaching the students the facts that they have to take in as if I'm just depositing knowledge into their heads. Especially with like state standardized testing, which is really problematic. So I wanted to go on to teach students about what I'm passionate about, and that's environmental justice.
Yeah, I think I had a similar kind of process in terms of coming to grad school. I loved the thesis senior year. I was a history major, so I was really excited by that. I wasn't completely sure I wanted to go to grad school though, and so I took those 2 years to kind of make sure this was the right path for me. And just to speak to the question that Amber posed earlier, for me, I think it was helpful to have that break because I wasn't 100% sure about my path going forward. So that was certainly, I think, helpful for me just to clarify what I really wanted. I very much enjoyed working, but I wanted to return to that kind of intellectual engagement that I found at Barnard.
For me, I was a part of the Alumnae's undergraduate fellowship for my sophomore year at Barnard, and this is a really great program that from the get-go starts to get students prepared to become professors and to be in academia. So I was highly involved inside of that program from the start of my time at Barnard. So based on like the mentorship and a lot of discussions with a lot of people that were in grad school, I was most excited about going this pathway and going straight away. So I did go actually like the fall after I graduated from Barnard. And while I do have some regrets about that decision, it can be oftentimes very, very easy to get burnt out if you do go right away. It's also nice because you have an easier transition sometimes between undergraduate and graduate school if you haven't experienced what the work life outside of academia is like.
So Amber, if I could stay with you then, we're already getting questions from students, which is great. I love it when Zoom is actually working. You know, when you were thinking about graduate school, perhaps for you, it was that MMUF really pushes the doctoral pursuit and, you know, tries to facilitate entrance into doctoral programs. But a question came in about deciding between a master's program. And this, I think, relates a little bit to the last question too. Sometimes people use master's programs as an opportunity to discern whether they want to go to PhD programs first, do an MA, and then go. I'm not sure if all of you have thoughts about this, but you know, how did you choose a doctoral program instead of going to a master's program? Was that something that was on your mind, or was it you were always tending towards a PhD?
So I did consider going towards a master's program, but for me it was finances that led me towards the PhD. A lot of master's programs can be very expensive, And with a PhD, you also do earn a master's and the progression towards getting your PhD. And depending on the school that you go to, it's possible to get the master's. And then if you decide that like the dissertation is not for me, I can't continue, you can leave the program. So overall, I felt like a PhD was a better route because it would allow for me to like try it out. And if I didn't like it, I could always leave and I wouldn't be $60,000 in debt.
Yeah, same here. I was honestly sort of nonchalant about it. I was like, oh yeah, I guess I'll go in a PhD program because I want a master's and I can get a master's for free and just decide if I want to pursue the PhD after that. And I got sucked in. But then there is some sort of, well, at least in my program, there was some sort of expectation that those of us who didn't come in with master's degrees in sociology would finish still in this 5-year time period than the students who already came in with master's degrees, which is completely not really realistic. And here I am going into my 6th year. So that's something to keep in mind about that attitude when you're looking at programs and talking to students from other programs.
Yeah, I just want to second all of that. I don't think the master's is really worth it unless it's fully funded, because you can just get one for free along the way and you can always leave after the master's.
Yeah, so I think that resonates. You talked about, sorry, I think I just echoed weirdly. Some of what we talked about this year about, applying for a doctoral program in several institutions, you're also automatically considered for the master's programs that feed into the doctoral program. So in case you don't gain admission to the PhD, you may be considered for the department's MA. It's another way to kind of game out your odds with the application process. Question came in right for one of the most important, I think, considerations that are on the minds of students increasingly on the entry to a PhD, which is, can you talk a little bit about the way that students are supported for, taking their research into a range of careers? So I think there's a lot of concern about this right now, especially the academic job market is always in a crater. It's been in a crater as long as I've done this work. It's been in a crater in history since the 70s. The sky is always falling in the academic job market. And so sometimes it's pessimism disguised as real talk. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about support for careers, in many different fields. I hesitate to say outside of academia, which creates this unhelpful binary. But if you want to say some things about, support for academic careers and the ways you may feel supported or not for, exploration of other different paths.
I can jump in on that. I think it's really important to go into the PhD thinking that you may not get an academic job, no matter how, amazing your program is or how brilliant you are personally. It may not happen. So I think it's important to start laying the groundwork for alternative career paths quite early in the program. And I think Amber and Lourdes work in fields that, correct me if I'm wrong, have a little more actual skill building and a little more kind of practical import, but especially in history, which is, kind of a humanities field, like there isn't really that much that you can kind of claim as a transferable skill that you earned in your PhD. I mean, you can, but you're still kind of working with a very humanities kind of skill set. So I think you need to be extra proactive in building experiences that maybe get you out of your program and get you a little bit more involved in other stuff that you might be able to build on or leverage once you've graduated if you're not able to find an academic job. So I, for instance, interned at the mayor's office here in New York during my 3rd year of the program. And it wasn't the best internship, didn't find it that rewarding, but I think it was still helpful in giving me some exposure to stuff outside the academy. And I think different departments have different levels of support with this kind of stuff. So in history at Columbia, we have a program called History in Action. Interesting name, In Action. But basically it supports students who want to do stuff like that. So you can be funded for a semester to do an internship or do your own kind of research project that is maybe more public facing and those kinds of opportunities. So I would say, do that kind of looking early on in your program.
Yeah, I was very strategic about this. It's funny because I came in wanting to teach, and I am going to my 6th year, have not TA'd at all, because all I've been doing is applied research. And there, so yeah, I went for a graduate certificate in data analytics as part of my PhD coursework. So I know that I have that as a backup. I know I'm teaching high school as a backup. And also I've helped build an organization called the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative. And we have really worked together, you know, technologists, activists, scholars, general public, to monitor changes on federal websites of mentions of things like climate change, which has been scrubbed, and to archive federal environmental data. So this is sort of like in the nonprofit, you know, going into nonprofit world and making those connections too has, I feel, you know, set me up for more opportunities once I finish.
I really like the point that you brought up, AJ, earlier about how it's a false binary between academia versus outside of academia, and there are a lot of ways of merging the two. I think I've figured out that like you don't actually need to have a tenure track position to do a lot of the work that a lot of academics are interested in. There are think tanks, there are part-time positions, there are nonprofits, and so many other options. One of the things that's been helpful for me is during the summers, I'll try to dip my toes into something that is outside of a traditional job in academia. So one of the fellowships that I did was called the Urban Leadership Fellowship, and it gives you the chance to work with governments and with nonprofits, just trying to put your research skills to usage in places that could really use them. So I highly encourage you guys, if you have time over the summers, it might be helpful to start thinking about what you could do in addition to pursuing academia, if that's what you want. But if the job market remains the way that a lot of people predict it's going to be, it's always helpful to get some experiences outside.
Yeah, I think all three of you are saying things that I really do feel like would not have been possible to talk openly about 15 years ago. The awareness of the vitality of jobs that leverage your training, especially if you are pursuing other things on the side, the knowledge about that and the support of that has increased tremendously in the amount of time that I've been doing this work. And, you know, Divya, to your point, the American Historical Association, but really APSA and ASA too are doing much more. Those are the professional associations that are affiliated with the disciplines of our speakers today, are all doing much more work to make it more visible and more acceptable so that we start to break down more of these binaries between traditional and non-traditional, academic and non-academic, and simply think about how to put really great work to use in the world in lots of different ways. So maybe if we can back up from, you know, that the very end, you know, you all are still thinking about this, it's in your future, to going back to the beginning. And, you know, can you help students think about some of the questions they should be asking themselves, alumni, faculty in the programs, and current students in programs to assess which programs could be a potentially good fit for them? Like, how do you do that process of exploring in such a way that you find a place where you feel like you have an intellectual and personal home?
For me, I went to the faculty, the scholars that really I loved reading. There was one, so the person who I went to study with in my program, Dr. Phil Brown, he's a leader in environmental health, and I loved reading his articles about community-based participatory research. So I found him, and you know, that was the top program that I wanted to be in. So I think that's the first step, is to find those people. And also know what they're like personally. So that's what you should ask, you know, once you apply to the programs, ask the students who are in that program what they're like personally, because there was another person that turned out to not be someone that I would want to work with.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that the real narrowing comes after you're admitted to the programs and you're able to kind of meet with the people who admitted you. But even when you're applying, it's important to identify faculty who you'd want to work with, who are, you know, who are tenured professors, who are not about to retire or are not people who have just gotten hired. So they'll be able to take on grad students. They won't just disappear kind of halfway through your program. So that's kind of the most important thing I would say. I think unlike undergrad, it's not so much about the institution, it's more about the program and more about the specific faculty members.
I think for me, I had difficulties deciding between what program I would do. I was a double major in sociology and in political science. So one of the helpful questions that I sat down with a lot of my mentors with was, I list some of the things I'm interested in, some of the questions I want to pursue, and I'd ask them, are there resources and communities within this discipline that will help me to respond to my questions? So making sure that whatever program you decide has adequate resources so you'll be able to be successful and that you won't be facing too many hurdles.
I think all three of these points really interlock effectively. I mean, part of it is a lot of conversations with your faculty advisors at Barnard and helping you find a disciplinary home. Something we've talked about this week is there's so much interdisciplinary work that happens at Barnard, and it's great, but when you're applying, it seems beneficial, and you can please correct me if I'm wrong, that when you're trying to situate yourself within sociology or within history or applying to a political science program, it can be beneficial to really say, no, I really am in this discipline. I'm bringing these other influences to the work, but I could have a home here based on what I know. And then your points about picking your boss and not your job, essentially, you know, picking that faculty member who will have a lot of influence over your academic trajectory in the program for 6 years, 7 years. You know, this will be your person for a long time. You want to make sure they might not retire along the way, that you actually get along with the person and know about their work styles. I think these are all really excellent points. I just kind of riff on that. What do you wish you knew? Like, what do you wish you had asked? Sitting where you are now, what are the kinds of things that you wish you had known more about when you were assessing your fitness to programs? It's kind of a tough one.
I honestly went into my program having a vague sense of what I wanted to study, and it could have gone a completely different direction. I'm lucky that I found social studies as science, and I did not even see that happening in my future when I applied. So I lucked out that I found it, but I didn't really have an idea of the scholars in the field, like the actors in the field, and only had minimal experience with the literature. So I wish I did more research on that beforehand.
Yeah, actually, same here. I went in thinking I was going to work on a different topic than I ended up choosing. And even though they weren't like hugely far apart, they're both historical topics. I think I also kind of lucked out in that Columbia turned out to be a very good home for working on urban history, let's say. But yeah, I think it's a bit tricky because your interests will also evolve once you're in graduate school. So part of it is that, like Amber said, you want to be at an institution where, you know, there are lots of resources for you and people who are, you know, working to answer questions that speak to your interests.
I think that some departments, they have a lot of gatekeeping and a lot of unspoken rules. So I think that before arriving, I wish that I had asked more questions about the different expectations concerning the things that we need to do, because there's some things that aren't written explicitly, and then you find out like a month beforehand, oh, I need to meet this, I need to tackle this hurdle, and I need to jump over this specific thing, but you don't always know. So I think I would try to have more intentional conversations from the very beginning about the different things that we need to do and the different expectations that our programs, but also our professors have of us.
Amber, I'd love to stay with you on that for a second. If you can articulate some of those kind of unexpected expectations. Sometimes this is like departmental service. Sometimes it's like mentoring. Sometimes it's more teaching, less teaching than expected. So if you could say something more about that, that would be great. And then, you know, we talked a little bit about this in the email exchange before the event. You know, what are some of those unexpected challenges that turned out to be harder than you thought would be as a doctoral student? They come up, right?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of different things that I can discuss in that, just because there are a lot of things that are unexpected when you enter into a program like this. For me, like we have syllabi when we get to Barnard. They tell us all the different assignments that we need to do when they need to be completed. We had syllabi for some of our classes inside of our program, but there were also things that we needed to do beyond coursework. So we were expected to be like a research assistant. We were expected to serve in the department. This could be going to like the student orientation meetings. This could also be making sure that you're attending every single weekly seminar. And like one of my peers didn't realize that they were expected to be there every week, and they ended up sending that in their year-end letter about how they were disappointed that that person wasn't there. So attending different events, making sure that you have different research assistantships in addition to the TA shifts, in addition to the courses. So it's just balancing a lot of things that I wasn't aware that we'd always have to balance, I think. But I'd love to hear what Divya and what Lourdes also experienced.
Yeah, all of that. And also, yeah, you think because your classes meet once a week and you're only taking 3 classes, that you will have more time to actually dig into things, but that's not the case. You really, like, I learned how to be really efficient with my time and how to structure it, and I'm still working on that. That's one of the hardest things about grad school.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's an expectation that even beyond all the required stuff, you're kind of working silently in the background on your own stuff, which is a hard balance to strike. And I think the transition can be very challenging. For me, it was really difficult to transition from, working full time to being back in school, and also being back in Morningside Heights, also a bit of a struggle. And I think, especially for those first few years, it's not law school, it's not business school. It can be somewhat infantilizing, right? Like you're back in the classroom, you have professors again, yeah. I think it's tough, and you really have to work to carve out your identity as, like a scholar and, as someone who's going to contribute to your field. But yeah, those first couple of years can be difficult, because also people in your cohort are coming from all kinds of different experiences. So I think it's important to find your support system in those first few years, because it's a long haul.
Yeah, and this seems like an appropriate moment then, because you've mentioned some key factors here. Carving out your identity, figuring out your place in the program. The social sciences disciplines are a broad church. Let's say they're very different, program to program. So if you please just speak to your own experience. But if you have thoughts to say about, some of your peers and colleagues, what has it been like to navigate questions of identity, whether it's around gender, whether it's around your personal background? Navigating departments can be challenging. And, we had a question come in from a student specifically, and I'll just read it because I think it articulates it most clearly. If you can talk about being a woman of color in departments that are white academic departments, and particularly around questions of gatekeeping. So Divya, your comments about kind of getting acclimated, your first steps, I think would be a good jumping off point. But I mean, this is obviously a concern no matter what program you're applying to. How do you assess programs, whether they're committed to advancing people of color and women in the disciplines? Get a lot of questions about this, obviously.
Yeah, I'll just start off on that. Obviously, there are a lot of challenges in grad school, and I think especially for Black and Latinx students, those challenges are definitely magnified. And for first generation college students and first generation PhD students as well. So I guess all I have to say on that is that it is important to make sure that you're in a department where there are mentors who look like you and who are who are committed to kind of nurturing those kinds of communities. And I think you can also get a sense of that when you go to the visiting day after you've been admitted in the spring, because you do meet all the current students, and you can talk to them in a more candid environment.
Yeah, this is a big question for me, because coming to my department, which is mostly white, and also even though it's mostly women, it still has this male-led culture. Coming from a mostly Black, teaching at a mostly Black high school with mostly Black and Latinx faculty, and then Barnard was more diverse than my department at Northeastern. It was a complete shock. And honestly, it required therapy. It required, support from other students of color. And it's been a real hurdle, but also for me, I think it's necessary to go through this to, I hate the word diversify this mostly white field. And it's a constant struggle, but you have to have like a really strong sense of identity too, to challenge what's been constructed so far.
I really relate to a lot of what's being said. It's very, very, very difficult, and it can be very, very isolating too. There are 4 students who are Black inside of my political science program out of almost 60 other graduate students. So we're very clearly inside of the minority. I think that a lot of issues of identity will be discussed on a very superficial level. So like most of the departments at Penn, they sent out like one letter, or they held one discussion on issues of diversity after George Floyd, but that was it. So I think that most of these discussions are very superficial inside of my own department, which can really be difficult to fight against that, but also do all the other things that are expected as a PhD student. And then on the other hand, also being a woman inside of a field that is dominated by men has been very difficult. While doing exit polls and ethnography, I discussed with different supervisors about how, like, as a woman on the street doing this work, I can encounter harassment, which can be really distracting. And we'll have these discussions about how they want to make changes, but those discussions don't always pan out to action. So I don't have any solutions. I can just say that it's something that is really hard to balance, but I think it's going to be worth it if we can make a small improvement in the long run.
I just want to kind of shout out that you're getting, all 3 of you are getting just thanks for honesty and vulnerability in these responses. Appreciate the candor here. It's an important area, and I think things are changing slowly, and probably more slowly than folks would like. On this question, I'm a big advocate of trying to make graduate school less solitary. And I think that could be important in this area of, kind of finding advocates, finding folks that you can connect with on these issues. How have you gone about building a community of support for yourself? And if you haven't been successful in that and like flagging it, that's fine too. But, who are the people that you bring into your circle aside from your faculty advisors to get support on these kinds of issues, but also to make sure that you're still progressing in the intellectual work? In my experience with graduate programs, women are called upon to do this emotional labor much more than their male counterparts, who are allowed to be bumbly and just kind of like, oh, this is terrible, So I'm just curious about how you've built up support networks for yourself to make sure you're still progressing while also being called upon to do this work.
I think there are 3 different support networks that I rely on the most. One, we have a group chat that's called Swim Team, and it's called Swim Team because we feel like we're always drowning, so we're just trying to make it through together. And that's comprised of 4 students inside of like my specific department. So we'll have different things where we'll just have accountability sessions, and we'll also just complain and talk to each other about what we're going through, because those are people who really understand where you're coming from. My second network that's been super helpful is comprised of Black students across different departments, but still within Penn. And then the last network is people who are completely outside of academia, who just struggle with being inside of careers that are dominated by men or by white men.
Similar for me. I see those 3 tiers, and I also have Facebook groups like Latinas completing doctoral degrees, or there are all these support groups that are on Facebook or probably any other social media. And sometimes I've made connections with other grad students at other universities. I'm in Buffalo right now, so I have a friend in Toronto and maybe others in Buffalo. And like getting that outside friendship is also pretty good, because you're with the same people all the time in your program. So seeking outside people is helpful.
So I think those are great comments. Like getting the outside perspective. There aren't a lot of structures within PhD programs themselves that encourage you to do that. There's not a lot of positive reinforcement to push you back out into the world and get to know people outside of even sometimes your small subfield cohort. So I think it's just great advice that you're underscoring there. I think a common area of anxiety for students when they're thinking about, and alumni for that matter, especially alumni who spent some time out in the workforce and are coming back to graduate school, huge area of anxiety, sometimes overblown, sometimes well-warranted, is requesting support from faculty in terms of letters of recommendation, in terms of getting strong edits on personal statements and writing samples, which are so crucial to entry. Aside from programs like MMUF, where some of those support networks are built in, what was your experience requesting letters? And I know that this is not something that ends on entry to graduate school, right? You're asking for letters of recommendation for the rest of your life as an academic. So I'd be curious some of your advice about approaching faculty when you're first applying, and how to get over that hump of being anxious about asking.
Yeah, I can chime in on that. I hate asking for letters of recommendation, even now when I'm asking for like many on the job market this year. I just find it very embarrassing, and I feel like it's like asking a favor. But it's actually not. It's actually the faculty member's job, I would say, and unless you're like a really, I don't know, really awful student or something. I don't know. Unless you're like this terrible person who they have no reason to recommend, you shouldn't feel any shame about asking. I think especially if you're a couple years out of Barnard and like they may have forgotten you, it's important to kind of keep on their radar if you know that you're planning to apply to grad school, or even if you're applying to a different type of grad program. Just have those few people who maybe you email, like once a year, just so that they don't totally forget who you are. So just stay on their radar, I would say, so that when you do send out that email asking for a letter, it's not so out of the blue.
Can I stay with you 1 second? Can you just I'm a big advocate of just like saying hello, like, hey, I thought of you. I saw this article. Hope you're doing well. Like, how would you recommend people stay in touch? And, maybe Lourdes, you can weigh in here because you took some time as well. But I'm always getting questions about this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually very bad at this. I think it's great to stay in touch, and I think it's great to send that email saying, hey, thinking of you, saw an article. I think it can be hard for people to actually do sometimes, like execute that strategy. But I think especially with Barnard professors, they always want to hear, how you're doing. Presumably you're doing something in the post-Barnard time, so you can update them on what you're up to, those kinds of things. And, this is obviously easier if you're near New York or in New York, but if you swing back in the city, I'd say visit them on campus and just say, oh, I was stopping by, I wanted to say hi. I think that's very effective.
And during your time at Barnard, make these relationships with professors. Go to office hours. I never did that. I did it like once, and I regret that. But I did get my recommendations. I did get into PhD school, but I would have done that a little bit more. And another thing, when asking for recommendations, I include points. I pretty much, write the letter for them a little bit, saying, hey, remember I did this, remember this specific thing, remember I wrote this paper about this, and try to give each recommender different points for them to highlight different parts of you. Like one recommender will be someone you did, research with, that can speak to your research abilities. Another recommender can speak to your how you are in class, and then another, somewhere else doing something else. So just make sure they're different from different directions.
On the keeping in touch with people, one of the things that I've done that professors seem to really enjoy is like telling them thank you and letting them know what happens with that letter. So like if they wrote you letters at fellowship, if you get it, I'd let them know. And even if you didn't, I'd let them know and let them know what you're planning to apply to in the future, because then they'll feel like invested and they'll want to just keep supporting you.
I think that's really important, because I think in the same way that Divya, you're talking about, it feels like you feel like humbled or ashamed to like ask for a favor. There's also like this phenomenon. Sometimes it takes 2 times around the track to get into a doctoral program, and you might not get in the first time. And certainly when you apply for funding, you're not going to get 100% hit rate. So you're going to wash out of some of these, and it might my experience saying thank you. It didn't work out this time, but I really appreciate you supporting me. I'd love to talk about how we can make it stronger next time, I think is a really important way to stay in touch. And the whole, Lourdes, like basically writing your letter for yourself, it feels weird. You want the faculty member to just be creative, but it's, in my conversations with faculty, they appreciate it so deeply when they just know that they can help you better if you provide the perspective about what you need from a letter. So that's just like 3 really excellent points. So we kind of ran dry on student questions. I still have my big batch of softball, so I'm going to ask a few of those for sure. But just a reminder, guys, if you want to send questions in through the chat or even just go off mute, and I mean, who knows, like go on video for once? I mean, it's crazy. We can see. Just talking to myself all week. I'm so glad the 3 of you are on the call. At least I can talk to people. But in terms of like other questions that we typically ask, I usually do this in like a lightning round. Like, what's the one thing, that you're like, if you're a student going into junior, senior year, or you're an alum and it's your first time around the track on applying, like what's the one piece of advice that is really important to know before you get started? Applying, that is.
Well, I would say, I mean, can you picture yourself doing this for 6 years? Yeah, like, do you just, is it something you have to do? Because if it's not something you have to do, then just don't do it. When I have undergrads come to me who are interested in grad school, and in history specifically, I tell them that they should not apply to grad school. Or if they do apply, they should take some time and make sure it really is what they want. Because there's no guaranteed job at the end of it, and it's a really long time. So if you're super passionate about it, great. But if you're kind of like, oh, I just want to, spend time escaping the real world, like definitely don't do it. It's like not that much of an escape. So.
This is always the hardest, the soundbite one thing. It can be 2 things, you guys. I'm not putting you on the spot.
I think generally it's why. Why do you want to do this? Or why do you want to follow this path specifically to your career goal instead of other paths, which I've seen come to sort of the same nexus. And so then it's what kind of skill? It has to do with skills. I mean, as a PhD student, you're developing a certain set of skills. So yeah, what skills do you want to have and develop?
I think I would ask them what they need in order to learn. I think that it works in like different dimensions, like what do you need from an institution, what do you need from professors, but also what do you need from like your own mental, emotional, and physical health, just to make sure that they are in the space where it makes sense for them to be able to learn everything that they need to learn at this particular institution or in a particular program.
I think so. This came up in a couple of your comments here too. What are the keys to persistence? These programs are long, they're hard, they involve ethnographic work that can break down, they involve, project design that can go in unexpected directions. It sounds like some of you have changed your mind. We all know that lots of people decide they want to go a different direction after orals, after a master's. Like, what would you say are some of the keys to persisting? Community, therapy, swim teams, like what are the keys to persistence to get through to the end of these programs?
Set your boundaries and make them known, because there is that sort of culture of what Divya mentioned, like, oh, you're working on the background on your stuff, and then some sort of expectation that you're working 24/7. And no, that's not the case. I try to have a 9 through 5 or 10 through 6 schedule. And if my advisor tries to call me after 6 or even on the weekend, no, not answering that call, none of that. So treat it like a job.
I love that soundbite. Treat it like a job, graduate school as a career move, right? It's not like entering into the clergy and suddenly different rules apply. It's, you know, it can be a 9 to 5. It's hard to set those boundaries. Amber and Divya, I don't know how good you all are at that. When I was in grad school, I had a really hard time doing that.
Yeah, it definitely is hard to set the boundaries, but I totally agree with Lourdes's point. I think it's very easy to romanticize the struggling grad student who is always working, but that shouldn't be you. You should, you know, make time for work-life balance and hang out with people who are not in your program. That's also key, I think. And just find other sources of support. I do want to strike a more positive note, however, so not all of my comments are just very cynical. And I do want to say that, at least for me, in my experience, the program got a lot better once I was further along and once I had advanced to candidacy after my third year. So if you're not familiar with that, once you finish with coursework, you usually take a set of exams. And after that, you're kind of let out on your own, which of course has its own set of challenges, but can also be very empowering. And I have found that the post-orals, post-candidacy years have been like the most rewarding of my program, because you are actually able to set those boundaries in a more meaningful way, perhaps, or you're able to really kind of take charge of how you're managing your time. And no one is really checking in on you anymore. So you're able to kind of take responsibility for yourself and your work. And to me, that's kind of been the best part of getting a PhD, is being able to work on, you know, what you want to work on and really be your own boss in those later years. So yeah, so that's been really great.
I think what's helped me with like the grit and the persevering through a program is knowing why I'm inside of this program. So most people who enter the social sciences, they see something that's wrong and they care about making it better. So trying to really stay grounded in what my goals are with the program is one of the things that I'll go to. We had one professor come and speak to us, and she told us that there wasn't a single day where she didn't think about quitting. I think it's normal to think about quitting when you're in a graduate school program, but knowing and having those set reasons about why you're not going to and what this degree is going to help you to accomplish is one of the things that keeps me here.
That's awesome. And I have to say, by the way, this is I've enjoyed this conversation so much. You guys have provided real but actually optimistic advice. So Divya, I wouldn't be self-critical. I think this has been a really positively inflected conversation with like lots of ways to just approach graduate school as a professional challenge. But let's end it on an even more optimistic note, which is, what do you still enjoy? What do you enjoy most? What do you enjoy more than you did when you even started out on this path?
I think one of the aspects about graduate school that we haven't talked on as much is teaching. So as a graduate student, I get to teach a lot. And that's something that I really enjoy because my students are just such bright and so curious. So I love being able to be inside of the classroom and to share not only what like I've learned from other scholars, but also what my own research has taught me with them. So I think teaching has been something that I really enjoy.
So I always hated group work. I was always an independent learner up through college. But then all of a sudden, I'm doing all these collaborative projects, and maybe it's because it's with people who, you know, we're sort of we're on the same page about things. But I love group work. I love working with people and authoring papers with other people instead of just writing alone. So that sort of, yeah, collaboration. I love it.
The real benefit of the social sciences fields, right? I mean, your STEM too, humanities can be a little bit more solitary, but you work with people in the social sciences. There are multiple authors on papers by design. It's great.
Yeah, I just want to also mention that teaching can be really rewarding. Obviously, it can be tough too, but it's great to be able to actually see how you're making an impact in students' lives and engage with them in the classroom. So that's been really, really fun. Probably my favorite part of the program. And also on a more fun note, depending on your program, you can do a lot of traveling. So for instance, in history, your fourth year is like your research year. And depending on if you've picked a project which has sufficiently fun travel locations to go to, you can kind of travel to like a bunch of different places. So I traveled for like almost a year. I lived in the UK, I lived in India, and it was super fun, great experience, very intellectually engaging, but also just a lot of fun. So that was a huge perk of the program, and one that I wouldn't have been able to, really get any other way.
Yeah, I want to add to that that's number one, is the traveling. And I've gotten to go to so many places, and then each year I like tack on a week to wherever I go for a vacation. Like if I'm giving a talk in Europe, like I gave a talk in Wales and I was like, oh, I'm going to take a week and go, to Amsterdam, Paris, Berlin. And I'm like, yes, this is a great career.
So yeah, I mean, that sounds amazing. I want to go to Wales more. Actually, Amanda Dye on our team is a PhD in linguistics and studied Welsh, and so all of her travel during graduate school was like on these amazing trips to Wales. So we have a couple of minutes left, and I'm a big fan of ending Zoom calls on time. So any parting thoughts that you'd like? This has been a great conversation, but is there any kind of last word that you'd like to add? And then I'm going to put you on the spot and say, I hope everybody who's here today might be able to send you a follow-up email for any questions that they might have not been able to ask. But parting shots before we go back into our 95-degree day here at least in New York.
Yeah, feel free to email me, Skype me, and, especially if we have similar interests. It would be great. I love talking to Barnard students.
Yeah, I'm also here, so shoot me an email. I'd love to hear more about what you guys are interested in. And also, like, if you're hesitating, I'd urge you to just go ahead and try it out, because you never know what might come from it.
Yeah, definitely shoot me an email if you'd like to ask me questions. And yeah, I think Barnard sets you up really well for grad school. And even though we've talked a lot about challenges and obstacles, you can definitely do it. And if you're really passionate about pursuing a PhD, like, you have what it takes. So,
Thanks to all three of you for what is, no surprise, a super substantive and very helpful tactical conversation. Appreciate your warmth and your generosity of your comments. We will definitely all be in touch. For everybody on the call, just keep in mind, I always do it this way. I found all three of these awesome alumni on LinkedIn and contacted them based on contact information I was able to find through their profile pages in their graduate programs. I'm not using any secret sauce to find folks. So we always encourage you to leverage some of the best practices that we're sharing at Beyond Barnard about connecting with the network. Tomorrow we will round out graduate school week in the social sciences with a great faculty panel. We'll have Linda Bell from economics. She's also provost of the college and dean of the faculty. Paige West from anthropology, and Nara Milanovic from history. So I hope you'll join us for that conversation. And for now, everybody, I love Paige West too. She's awesome. So we will see you hopefully tomorrow. Thank you again to our lovely alumni guests, and we'll speak to you soon. Thanks, everybody. Take care.